Champlain actually worked for 7 different organizations through his career. And what I'm going to do is run through a lot of the details relating to his life. Ultimately, his time on Georgian Bay was approximately 2 3/4 days. He encountered, as his group on August, maybe late July, early August of 1615, he encountered 300 Ottawa picking blueberries on the French River. And he was really surprised at how many people were out there picking blueberries. So if you think that blueberries and blueberry picking is a new tradition on Georgian Bay, it's been going on for a long time, and it really surprised Champlain. Champlain describes his time on Georgian Bay as basically a canoe trip through islands and inhospitable rock that was of no use for agriculture whatsoever. So his cumulative impressions of La Mer Douce, the freshwater sea that he names Lake of the Hurons, is ultimately not all that impressive until he gets into Wendake and begins to realize just how agricultural the Wendat. The Wendat are the name of the Huron people. The French basically call anybody west of the Ottawa River a Huron. I like to think of the term as ruffian or country people, as opposed to the native groups, the Montagnais and the Algonquians that Champlain was familiar with along the Ottawa, or the lower Ottawa and the St. Lawrence. So, who was Samuel de Champlain? A man of colossal scope. He's an administrator, a soldier, an explorer, a cartographer, a writer, and a promoter of New France. He's certainly in on the very earliest wave of Europeans to encounter a great number of Canada's first peoples. He's also charter of coasts and waterways. This is one of the earliest, what I call comprehensive maps. It's really interesting that he has used a lot of Henry Hudson's detail as well as his own detail, and he has surveyed from basically Nantucket all the way to Labrador in the approximately 10 years before he actually produces this map. He's also a writer. This is his first book, Des Sauvages, by Champlain, written in 1603, and it's probably the most important travel writing document of the 17th century. It really promotes coming to the New World, despite the fact that by the time he died in 1635, the French incorporated about 150 people in the new colony, whereas Virginia and Boston and the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Virginia Company probably had something in the neighborhood of 2,500 individuals. He is also the founder of the habitation at Quebec. So this is really, it's not the first buildings of a French style in Canada, but ultimately it's the source of the origins of Quebec City, which is an extraordinarily important community in the country. And in 1613, he wrote, "It is this art, navigation, which has drawn me to love the sea at a very young age, that compelled me to challenge its treacherous waters all of my life, and that made me navigate and follow the coasts of parts of America." So, was he a captain? Well, he was a captain representing the king. He was a lieutenant. He was a lieutenant general representing the king, but he was not a captain of the French Navy. He never drove or was captain of a ship, despite the fact that he traveled 23 times across the Atlantic in his career. So he loved what I call the art of navigation. And we think this is what Champlain might have looked like. He was a soldier. He was all of these wonderful things. But ultimately, there is no painting and there is no likeness. So these are fictitious elements. This is one that was done at the 300th anniversary of Champlain. The one that I showed you previously is on the front of this very large book up here, and it was done for the 400th anniversary. So who knows what he's going to look like for the 500th anniversary. The early years. We know that Champlain was born on the 13th of August, 1574. This was discovered in the La Rochelle archives by a genealogist 2 years ago. He's the son of a sea captain from Brouage, located along the Atlantic coast of France. This is the seaport town of Brouage, and what's really interesting is the river has now basically silted up, and the Atlantic has moved out some 3 or 4 miles from the actual city itself. And what made Brouage famous were all the salt marshes. And so Brouage manufactured salt, and every boat that went to America, all the fishing boats, all the whaling boats, they stopped in here to pick up all their salt, which would cure the fish that they would then bring back and sell. This is Champlain's birth certificate. This is the document in which this genealogist was going through, and this is the actual certificate for Champlain. We never knew when he was born. Some people estimated he could have been born as early as 1576, maybe as late as 1580. But as I say, 2 years ago, in an archive, we actually found the date of his birth. So, in his time in Brouage, he probably attended a school that was more for the formation of soldiers and cartographers and surveyors than he would have had he had a classical education. Whereas Marc Lescarbot, who is a contemporary of Champlain, was actually a classically trained. So he's bringing in all sorts of metaphors and idioms related to the Greeks and the Romans. Samuel de Champlain did not have that kind of an education. If you can generalize, he probably went to a community college of roughly 2 years and graduated from that, and about 1589, he joined the army. And the army at the time, Henry IV was fighting to gain the crown of France from a cousin, and France had gone through horrible Protestant versus Catholic wars, but he became a furrier. Now, what is a furrier? Well, it's a guy that draws maps, and maps of fortifications, maps of military troop movements, and maps as to where soldiers are going to be billeted. And he would likely go around and chalk out on houses where soldiers of Henry IV would be billeted during their various movements around France. So he's in the quartermaster's department, if you will. He is not a soldier that picks up a gun and actually fights, at least to the best of our knowledge, that is the case. Champlain fulfills a number of obligations for Henry IV. He does a number of missions on Henry IV's behalf. At some point, he is presented to the court of Henry IV. Some authors have suggested that maybe Henry IV was the father of Champlain. I don't think there's any reason to think that that's the case. After the wars in 1598, Henry IV asks Champlain to go to the West Indies. He wants to know what the Spanish are doing in the West Indies. And Champlain's uncle, a ship's captain, is prepared to take Champlain to the West Indies. So he leaves from Brevat and goes to Cadiz. And this is a picture of some of the military fortifications of Cadiz, and goes to the port of Havana. Now, the Spanish would always organize large groups of ships at one time to go across the Atlantic. That way they could protect them. They would do the same thing coming back. So you don't have a bunch of ships haphazardly going all over the place. They would go in a convoy. And when they arrived at Havana, Havana was sort of the jumping off point for all of the Spanish West Indies. It is purported that Champlain went as far as Mexico City. So he was there for approximately 3 years, and